We are back with the Dark Souls 2 crit play once again. I'm Woody, and I'm here with
Uh,
Kai.
Hi guys, what's going on?
And today we are going to be talking about the third and presumably final piece of Dark Souls 2 DLC, Crown of the Ivory King.
We wave Dark Souls 2 off into the sunset. But it's a pretty good send off, I would say.
It is. Now, I want to make a disclaimer before we talk about this, because I have a pretty strong bias when talking about this DLC. I absolutely love snow levels. They are probably my favorite kind of level in gaming. I like all the stupid snow gimmicks. I even like slidey floors, although there aren't any here from what I remember. But keep all of my criticisms and praises of this DLC in mind when thinking about that.
I will definitely keep you in check. Fortunately, we've got two opinions here, so if you can't trust him, I am definitely someone you can rely on.
So, this DLC is accessed from the Shrine of Winter, so it's a little bit different from the later two. Opens up right at the same time you can get the Castle Drangleic.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be behind one of the great Lord Soul bosses, but that is not the case.
Really, it being behind the Shrine of Winter kind of makes sense, because, as we've said, this is an ice area.
That's true. I didn't actually make that connection. Wow.
The
I was
Shrine
just
of
thinking,
Winter actually has a reason to exist now.
Yeah, not only that, I think geographically there is a neat little bit of symbolism there where you teleport from the footstep of one castle to the footstep of a different castle. So that's kind of neat.
Well, there have even been some people, bickering about lore, and is Eliam Lois maybe actually Drangleic Castle just really far in the past, and you go back in time instead of, going to a completely different area on the world in the same time span. So there's maybe a little room for interpretation there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's never stated that there is any kind of time travel. I mean, Artorias of the Abyss was in the past, so there is the catch-all MacGuffin of time, and Lordran / Drangleic is distorted, and anything can happen at any point. So you kind
Well,
of
and
have
then there's also all the giant soul stuff and everything, or kinship of the
right.
giants, and all of that going back in time with that, and
To what degree are you really affecting the past? I mean, I want to think that you're just literally visiting the memories. You're not having any effect. You're not really traveling back in time. But you do take back a very physical piece of important evidence from a memory that you used to finish the game. So, like, man, that gets weird.
So yeah, time travel has been established in this series as a thing, could be. But as for the rest of the lore of this area, this is probably the clearest and most obvious setup we have for any one of these DLCs, because we actually have an NPC here.
We have an NPC. We have voice acting. And it's
Which, I believe this is the only NPC who is actually introduced in the Lost Crowns trilogy.
yeah, she's the only one. Her name starts with an A. I forgot her name.
Alsana.
Alsana. And I had read different theories about the other Children of Dark before, and then the way she was characterized kind of made me think a little bit more about these. About if a character like Nishandra was truly evil. I mean, if you follow this whole cycle of light and dark and undeath and stuff, Drangleic was going to fall anyway. Was she truly responsible for that?
Well, and the Dark is not necessarily evil.
Yeah.
It's a force. It's more like a force of nature than anything else. And there's a lot of conflicting interpretations here. But one of the more interesting lore points that I've heard in relation to this was a theory tossed about if you talk to Dusk in the original Dark Souls after you've saved her from Manus, she will mention how she encountered the emotions of Manus and how it was very primal emotions and what he's felt. And she says 4 very specific emotions. There are 4 Children of Dark, and each of them can pretty easily sync up with what one of those emotions were.
So Dusk says this in Dark Souls 1?
Yes.
And then we have 4 Children of Dark in Dark Souls 2.
Yes.
Wow. That's really, really cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a conversation, and I'm I can't remember the exact names of what she said, but like she says, I could feel Manus's fear, I could feel his lust for power, and it basically goes on to describe what all four of the Children of Dark in this game would be.
And people say Dark Souls 2 doesn't have quality writing.
But yeah, as we said, there is a main narrative with this DLC, which the other two are pretty much exploring dead kingdoms, and this one is definitely a lot stronger of a central narrative arc.
Especially after you, I think most people in terms of Dark Souls 2 content were familiar with having no NPCs, or if you want to talk NPCs with dialogue to an extent, there's Alana, who is just threatening and foreboding and quite a bit scary, and then you move from that content to Alsana, who is kind of comforting and reassuring, and she kind of feels like someone you can trust, which is very refreshing.
So yeah, lore-wise, definitely the strongest out of all the DLCs. The whole description of how this area works, how the giant wall is made to help seal in the blizzard and seal in the old chaos, and the blizzard is going to help seal in the old chaos. It all ties together very nicely, and it makes a nice, relevant area. You know why the area is like how it's like.
Yeah, it's logically built. The gameplay and the story in this case complement each other extremely well. And I think that if you look at the other DLCs, they feel pretty self-contained and complete. I'm not going to say Old Ivory King doesn't feel complete, but I think that this setting has the most potential to have other things done with it, you know?
Yeah, this Eliam Lois is kind of like, in a different universe, this could have been Dark Souls 2.
Yeah, exactly. I think GameSpot said that you could set an entire game in Eliam Lois. I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but there's a lot to the setting that wasn't explored that I think would be really cool to see.
So, speaking of that setting, let's move on to the actual physical level design of this area.
It is pretty good, I would say.
It gives me very, very strong vibes of the Boletarian Palace from Demon Souls. A lot of these pieces of DLC have come in giving me Demon Souls vibes. It's got like a lot of these small courtyards and really claustrophobic hallways, which can be troublesome if you have large weapons. And a lot of twisting, overlapping pathways, lots of backtracking once you unlock the blizzard after defeating Ava. So it's a very complex area.
It felt like Boletaria plus Undead Burg, if you ask me. And even though it shares a bit of a snow theme with Painted World of Ariamis, the way the snow is handled and the way it affects the area and the atmosphere feels completely different, which I thought was nice. I think it's nice that you have two very distinct snow areas in the Soul series that feel nothing alike.
Yeah, it's a good premise, and I would also say, in terms of the raw size of this level, I feel like Ilium Lois might be the single biggest area in the series.
I think I probably agree. It is enormous.
Yeah.
And it's impressive that the place has 5 bonfires, and I don't think any of them are ill-placed.
No, they're all pretty well considered, aside from the overabundance of one-way drops.
I was about to say that. I was going to say, the distance between the bonfires is fine, but this game's fetish with having you drop down places that you can't climb back up, this is at its most frustrating because the pacing of this DLC is almost exactly like the old Iron King, where you play through half of it, you do a thing, now you can explore the other half, and you have to find an arbitrary amount of MacGuffins to do something else. And in this case, it's made, even though I think the level design is ultimately more interesting, it feels like re-exploring these areas is a bigger hassle than it was in Old Iron King, because not only are they perhaps over-densely populated with enemies yet again, in this case, getting around areas is a bigger pain in the ass, because if you want to get to something right next to the second bonfire, you got to go back to the first one, go through all those enemies again, plus the new ones that are now sprouting up, and then get something that's maybe, just feet within the bonfire because there's no ladder or there's no staircase.
Yeah,
that's
the lack of any ladders and the lack of easily moving around this area, which I think ties into both the complaint of having too many enemies, which I would also agree with. This area has too many enemies that you kind of have to be too engaged in, and their patterns make it so that you can't really easily run through them like you can with a lot of other areas. It kind of presents you with a lot of fights where you just have to fight everybody if you're going to a certain place. the lack of stairways back to that earlier areas, those would both be annoying in and of themselves, but they're made more annoying because you have to backtrack so much in this area. And I normally don't mind backtracking, and going through this area the first time is really cool because if you've ever played a video game before, and if you're playing Dark Souls 2, you probably have, you are making a mental checklist of, oh, there are chests in ice, I'm going to be coming back for these. At some point, something is going to happen that lets me get in there. And
Yes.
that's always a really cool element in your Metroidvania-style games, of doing that little mental checklist of stuff you need to come and check out. But it's just made frustrating by the odd, like, bonfire drop-off points and all of the excess enemies.
Yeah, even more excessive in like New Game Plus and beyond. Oh man, it was ridiculous, especially since for some reason when I played through the first two DLCs, even though they were New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus, I never had a problem with being invaded through them, and really, but I got invaded constantly as I was playing through this DLC, which just made it a bigger pain in the ass.
And so it's pretty straightforward through most of this early part of the DLC, and you eventually get the Lens of Truth / Eye of the Priestess. It's basically the same item. And that reveals the random soldier dudes stationed in the castle, and it lets you see Ava and go through that area. Now, we'll talk about Ava in a minute. But after you've defeated Ava, you talk to Elsana, and she says, hey, maybe you're actually a cool guy, and you can defeat the chaos or something. So she undoes the blizzard, and then you can go do your whole backtracking thing.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned backtracking a little bit. I'm always somewhat cynical about backtracking in a game like this, because while I do like it when it's done well, I also feel like it's kind of a way to use the same content and have it be new. But I think this kind of avoids it by having so many new areas be unlocked when you go back.
Yeah, that is true. Like, I would say that, maybe not half, but a huge portion of the DLC, like, is opened up once the blizzard is shut down. And
well, especially if you count Frozen Outskirts as as a portion of that.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can access. I would not have had a problem with this if it wasn't, like I said, if this pacing wasn't pretty much exactly the same as Old Iron King.
Yeah, it does feel a little too similar, and I do think this... I was going to say I think this does it better, but I really don't know if I think that or not.
I feel like I want to say it does it better, but it's just kind of trading some annoyances for other annoyances.
Yeah, because I think it's a more extreme example, because there is a lot more new stuff, and there's a lot more new substantial stuff once you get the blizzard to go away here, but there is also a lot more bullshit that you have to deal with compared to Old Iron King.
But, I mean, obviously, we ultimately seem pretty positive about this, so putting up with that bullshit is clearly worth it, I think. This DLC has some pretty mean shit it throws at you.
So, speaking of mean shit, if we're talking about level design, let's talk about the Frozen Outskirts.
The Frozen Outskirts. This
is a weird area.
It is. It annoys me, and it's frustrating, but there's no other Souls area like this, so I appreciate it, and it adds a new enemy type, which is really cool.
I completely agree with that assessment of this as an area. This is not an area type I would want to see repeated a lot, but it being a novel new thing is pretty cool.
Yeah.
For what it does, and I like that it's a new experience. I feel it's probably the best of the challenge areas from all the DLC, and having not been too big of a fan of those, I'm maybe easy to impress in that regard. But I still think it did some cool stuff. And also, like I said, I really like snow levels, and like there's something really badass about like wandering through the snowy tundra with like your little team of dudes walking around with you.
I agree. It feels very unique. I think I kind of hold all the challenge areas on equal value, because there's a certain degree of cooperation and like working together in the Old Iron King one that I love with the way the level design splits, and then I like the Cave of the Dead in Sunken King because you can feasibly do all of that by yourself until you get to the boss at least. And then this one is just totally
this
different.
Area is a challenge area, as you said. The first portion of the DLC, or the first DLC, did a really good job at balancing solo play and co-op play. The boss was really co-op oriented, but the area you could get through pretty easy on your own. Iron King's challenge area was kind of about half and half, where it was. I kind of feel like it's a bad idea to fight the boss with co-op, even though it's good to go through the area with co-op.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not like Smelter Demon needs more defense.
Yeah.
And this area, I feel, leans very, very, very heavily towards co-op. Because it's difficult to get through this area solo. I mean, it's certainly possible, but, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the Kieran enemies have like a bizarre spawning thing that's never been done in this series.
Yeah, exactly.
And then on top of that, the boss fight for this area is, I'm not going to say it's impossible to fight this solo, it's like possible if you're very, very patient, but combined with how long it takes to get to this fight, and that there's two unique enemies you need to fight at once, I feel like it is a very, very co-op oriented fight.
Absolutely. I also like, I mean, I think we all expected some degree of recycled content with this boss. It's been a pattern so far. I think it's by far the best challenge area boss. So, I still thought it was pretty cool.
So, since we're talking about the Kierans and kind of chatting about enemies, let's actually get into talking about the enemies here.
Yes.
And I guess we'll start with those things. These Kierans, they're called like Blizzard Stallions or something, but they're Kierans.
Right.
I don't know how well versed you are in your East Asian mythologica, but they're Kierans. It's like they're the weird horse things with horns. They're sometimes like called Chinese unicorns and stuff. So that's what they are. They're associated with storms and everything, so everything fits except the translation team.
Right.
And they're pretty cool. I like them. They have a very large move pool.
Yeah, oh man. The fucking variety of attacks they have is so threatening.
And as I mentioned before, these things have a really bizarre spawn pattern. Because in the Frozen Outskirts, there are not an infinite number of these, but they don't respawn when you go to the bonfire. So, as long as you stand out in the snow, more will spawn, and eventually you will just kill them all. There is a finite number of them, so it's really weird.
I didn't know that. I never got them to stop spawning.
Yeah.
Do you know how many there are?
There's a, I've heard, like, estimates between, like 20 to 30 and 40, so it's kind of unclear.
Good lord.
But basically, once you kill all of them, they will stop spawning until you use a bonfire aesthetic.
Okay, interesting.
So, while they are very difficult, I think a lot of people are very annoyed by these enemies, you can actually stop them a lot easier than you can with other enemies.
Interesting.
So if you really want to just bum rush the fog door, get yourself a team of people and just go camp out in the blizzard and spawn kill all of them.
Right, gotcha.
The main enemies of this DLC are the Ice Knights and the variants thereof, the Spell Sword guys that have rapiers and shoot stuff at you, the guys with big icicle backpacks on that have spears and shields and also shoot ice at you from long range. They're the Grunt Force.
Yeah, there's also the taller versions. Those guys that can impale you and shoot.
Oh, those are a completely distinct enemy, the guys with lances.
Gotcha. Anyway.
Those are Rampart Golems.
Rampart Golems.
And they're a pretty unassuming enemy. Like, they have a cool design, I think, but they're pretty easy to fight. I really like them, and thankfully I did get this on a recording, because the first time I was fighting them, I kind of, like, charged forward a little bit too suicidally and got impaled by one and tossed off a ledge.
I have to see that. That sounds amazing.
Which was like one of those, oh, I'm bummed I died, but that was a really cool way to die.
Speaking of, like, the standard grunts, the sons of bitches with the shields and the icicle backpacks and the spears, I hate them. I think I hate them more than almost any other enemy in a Souls game. Like, I hate them so much.
Yeah, they're one of those guys that they have a real tendency to just clip you. Like, I don't really think I've died to them that much, but they're just a pain in the ass to fight.
I've died a lot to them. They've killed me quite a few times. I despise them, and I don't think there's any enemy that annoys me as much as I hate them. So.
I have made this complaint with both of the previous DLCs, and I'm going to make it again here, is that this just feels like they wanted to make another generic Mook enemy to have us fight in this that would be, like, special to this area. And once again, I feel like they don't need to do that, because I feel like the other unique enemies they made here are good enough to stand on their own.
I agree, and it's especially ridiculous because all of these humanoid grunt knight enemies, they all look like they have like the same kind of animations and the same proportions and size across all 3 DLCs, just with like different flavoring added to their exteriors.
Yeah, this could have very easily just been the same model, like, tweaked a bit. And, because, like I said, between the retainers, who, like, sort of become active after the blizzard, between the cooler ice golem dudes who have the morphing weapon arms, who I actually do like those guys.
Oh, yeah,
I think
those
they
guys are
probably
great.
could have been in the stand-in for the actual basic enemies. And then between the large guys with the lances and the shields who, like, chop their lances at long range, I think between those 3 they have enough basic enemies that they could have just done that and not given us the boring basic dude again.
I agree.
And then there are also the just normal knight dudes that are invisible until you get the Eye of the Priestess. Which,
I don't remember those at all. Like, I never fought Ava until I had the eye. I didn't even know Ava could be invisible until someone told me when I started fighting him properly. And these apparently invisible knight dudes, I don't know anything about them.
you fight them up on the bridge with the Pharaoh's Lockstone that you open. I believe it's to get Durgo's hat.
Oh, the ones in the Elite Knight sets?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I was too nervous to cross over there at first, so I wasn't effective.
Yeah, those guys are invisible, and it's actually a pretty cool setup, because if you ever go back there when you replay this, go and check it out, because
They're
the
on the
invisible
ballistas.
knights, yeah, they're on the ballistas, and they will shoot you when you go past.
Right, that's why I was afraid. I was like, that's suspicious. No thank you.
Yeah, I was like, this is... Because I avoided it the first time through, just as you did, and I played through it again recently, and that time I decided, oh, we'll go check it out this time, because I want to get Durgo's hat. And it turns out they actually are there, and they are invisible, just like the enemies in Shaded Woods. They can be damaged, and they can be killed, but you can't target them. Which, as a side note, could be kind of a cool lore implication for the guys in the Shaded Woods. Maybe there's some kind of refugees from here.
That would be kind of interesting. Oh, I never even thought of those guys from a lore perspective.
Then you get what I'm imagining are going to be some of our favorite stuff regarding enemies in this DLC, which are the golems, which we finally get to fight.
Yeah, the golems are cool. I like that they added them as actual enemies this time.
And their gimmick's great, too.
Yeah.
They come alive when you kill an enemy near them.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting creative stuff in this DLC. I don't know about the lore implications of the golems that look like the ones that belong in Dragonlight Castle also being here. That's kind of thought-provoking.
Yeah, I'm
I guess.
unsure on that. I don't quite know. I don't know if this was like maybe Vendrick loaned him out or something. You know, the burnt Ivory King needed help with some moving, and he's like loaned him a couple of golems. But yeah, they're cool, and it makes you consider the areas a different way when you go through a second time, which is important if you're making people do backtracking. Because you kind of have to approach situations a little more carefully, because if you kill people when they're near golems, then the golems come alive, and they're kind of a pain to fight.
Yeah. Especially when there's other enemies, like, in the way.
Also, apparently, the golems have a pseudo soul suck move that drains like 5,000 souls from you if you get grabbed by them, but I've never been hit with it, so...
Interesting.
What else are we missing?
The hedgehogs.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about Sonic.
Sonic's gotta go fast. Unless you have a bow and a whip, and then it's not so bad. So...
These guys are the new wheel skeletons.
Yes, they are.
Did a good job at making wheel skeletons totally pointless via the boss fight, by the Skeleton Lord's boss fight.
Yeah.
But these guys are a good replacement.
They are. You can't even touch them. You can't use any close range, like particularly close range weaponry, or you get your shit fucked up. But I had a whip and a bow, so it was no big deal.
Yeah, they're not too bad to deal with. I do like the sort of minefield you go through of them later on, where it's them spaced with a bunch of golems. So you pretty much have to make the choice of, do you engage the hedgehogs at long range and kill them, and then fight the golems?
Yeah, that was cool.
Or, yeah, so yeah, it's kind of a nice little tricky situation they put you in.
Yeah, very clever.
And then I also guess we didn't talk about the retainers yet either, which those are the robed priestess ladies that come to life once the blizzard goes away, which I did not really understand all that much, to be honest with you.
I don't know what's up with them either.
I did my standard Dark Souls response to something where it did not attack me first, so I did not attack it. And it was very weird just having them sort of come alive after the blizzard and start attacking me. I'm not really sure what the reasoning for that is.
I'm sure there's probably some thoughtful reason hinted somewhere about something.
Wait, do they attack you after you undo the blizzard, or after you get the Eye of the Priestess?
I think it's when you undo the blizzard.
Because, if I'm remembering correctly, after you get the Eye of the Priestess, the only retainers you actually run into are the ones in the rooms with the golems and the staffs, which are like a different kind of enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel like I should go back and test that. Because I could understand maybe that if you like went and defiled the grave of the priestess. So that's why they're all attacking you.
They also aggro under weird circumstances. Sometimes you can shoot them and they won't get up. I don't know what triggers it.
As for one-time encounter enemies, I actually might like this fight more than Sif.
I like it more than Sif. I can say that pretty definitively.